Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the MC Radio podcast presented by the Worst Take Network. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports app that is based on prop bets. Every new person that signs up using the promo code WTN and puts in $20 to play, Thrive Fantasy will give you an additional $20 to use in the app. So it's a win-win situation. We touched on it earlier in the last episode of MC Radio that sports betting is a future. This is an awesome opportunity for you all to get in. So shout out to Thrive Fantasy for giving the listeners and all the customers this awesome promo code to use. That extra $20. It's a little, but it goes a long way, especially when you're starting out and you don't want to start betting huge amounts of money right away. So shout out to Thrive Fantasy again. So let's get into this week's episode. So on this week's episode, I am flying solo. Maddux is on vacation. Yes, he's on vacation in the middle of a pandemic. Call him crazy, but he likes to live on the edge. He is somewhere in Arizona, I want to say. Not quite sure what he's doing over there, but hope he's having a great time. But yeah, it's just Chris today on the show. And there's a couple stuff I wanted to talk about. So the first one being is the most recent event that happened, which was the PGA Championship. So Maddux, if you remember, he was betting heavy on Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods, and Tiger Woods played horrendous when it was all said and done. And then Rory was average. He had peaks and then he had disastrous holes. He ended up finishing 1 under par. So Maddux didn't do too well there. And if you remember me, I was all in on Brooks Koepka. And going into the final round on Sunday, he was in contention. He was in second place. And from the very beginning on Sunday, it was just a disaster for him. He couldn't get anything going. He couldn't hit a fairway to save his life. And so, yeah, I didn't win any money on Brooks either. Very disappointing, but yeah, Colin Morikawa was the winner. I honestly had never heard of him before Sunday. Awesome tee shot on 16, and then he putted it in for eagle to kind of solidify his victory. So congratulations to him, California boy, went to Cal Berkeley. So shout out to him. Great performance by him, but not a great performance by me and Maddux in terms of betting. But that's just the way the game goes sometimes. Another thing I want to talk about is baseball. On last week's episode, we talked about the pretenders and contenders in MLB. And one team that we didn't talk about because their record wasn't really like outstanding enough for us to talk about it was the Oakland A's. And 1 week really made a difference when talking about the A's. They had a 9-game winning streak before yesterday when the Angels beat them, and they have been on a tear. I don't think people around the league are talking about Matt Chapman enough. I've always been a huge Matt Chapman guy. Like we always say, we're on the West Coast here. We get to watch the A's games all the time. We get to watch him play all the time, and he really is a superstar in this league. In yesterday's loss, that snapped the 9-game winning streak. He had 2 homers, a bases clearing triple, and a web gem at third base that just, I mean, this guy is a 5-tool player, and he is the real deal. If you don't know his name now, well, if you didn't know his name then, get to know it now, because I really think that he's in contention for American League MVP in this shortened season. And then in the National League, we did talk about the Padres. Me and Maddux debated as to whether the Padres were a pretender or contender. I called them a contender, I think. Do not quote me on that. But Fernando Tatis Jr., we talked about him, how he's electric. I mean, he went on like a little 3 games home run streak, and then the web gems are there, just like Chapman. If the season got shut down today, knock on wood, I think Fernando Tatis Jr. is the clear front runner for NL MVP. I mean, it's just crazy at such a young age. These guys are just. Tatis is another 5-tool player, and I mean, like I said, I don't like Machado as a Red Sox fan. I hate him. But watching Padres games has been fun this year, and a big part of that is Fernando Tatis Jr. I don't hate Fernando Tatis Jr. He hasn't done anything to me. He hasn't done anything to kind of taint the game of baseball like Machado has. So whether they win a lot of games, whether they contend for a World Series or not, um, I think all baseball fans should just kick back and watch Fernando Tatis do his thing and appreciate what he's doing for the game. Like we're saying, he's electric. He's everything he does. It just has you on the edge of your seats. So, shout out to him. I mean, shout out to the Padres. Shout out to the A's. And shout out to everybody in baseball who's trying to finish this season. And that kind of leads me into the next topic where the Cleveland Indians, we had Zach Plesac get suspended by the team for breaking coronavirus protocol. And a day later, it's announced that Mike Clevenger was with him breaking protocol. So they are both on the MLB's restricted list. And yeah, it's my thoughts on this is that it's selfish, especially for Zach Plesac and Mike Clevenger, because they're both pitchers. And their teammate in that Cleveland Indians rotation is Carlos Carrasco. And if you guys don't know, Carlos Carrasco had leukemia and had been battling it over the past year. And so we're seeing across the league that with Eduardo Rodriguez of the Red Sox, we don't know the long-term effects of this coronavirus. And Erod had COVID. He kicked it, but now he's dealing with a heart issue because of COVID. We don't know how that's going to affect him long term. And the fact that Carlos Carrasco and the Indians had leukemia, and we have his teammates just being reckless and selfish and going out on the town, knowing that there's a guy at risk who had a tough battle with the disease. I mean, it's kind of like a slap in the face, and they deserve that suspension. They deserve to be disciplined by the team. And on top of that, I'm really mad at Zach Plesac because a couple weeks ago, in regards to the Marlins, when they had their outbreak, he was very vocal about guys taking responsibility, doing the right thing, following protocol, and kind of bashing the Marlins. And then a week after, he goes and does the same thing or even worse, especially with a guy like Carrasco on the roster. I mean, come on. I honestly don't know what to say because it's kind of like, I don't think embarrassing is a word, but it's just a slap in the face, like I said earlier. So, not too happy with the Indians pitching staff right now. So I'll just leave it at that. Another topic we got to talk about is college football. I mean, pretty much all the conferences outside of the Power Five have already canceled or postponed their college footballs, or not just college football, but all their fall sports. And then at the time of this recording, about 20 minutes ago, it was announced that the Big Ten would be postponing their season. And I have a lot of thoughts about this. So my first thought is college football, NCAA. And this goes for all sports, really. You know that coronavirus is real and it's dangerous. And you have all this time to prepare. to make sure there are safety protocols to protect the players and to protect the staff. And then last week talks begin and they're scrambling. And it's like, how are you guys not prepared to have any plan? Like, how are they not prepared? You had all this time to prepare. You see what happened in baseball. You're seeing what's happening with bubbles in the NHL and NBA. I mean, have some kind of plan. And I know NCAA, you got to put academics in front of that. But sports is a huge revenue. They bring in tons of revenue every year. And you got to account for the players who are looking at a career in professional sports. Yes, they're going to get their degree, but they could also be even more successful in a career in the NFL or in other college sports where they would go to the Olympics. I mean, it's honestly sucks that the NCAA could be so incompetent like this. But so Big Ten postpones the season until the spring. Now, here's where I think they're going to get in a lot more trouble. So the Big Ten postponing their season into the spring is kind of going to persuade, or like, it's going to have the other four conferences in the Power Five think about postponing their season until the spring. Because if those other conferences play in the fall, then the college football playoff and the bowl games are going to be delayed because there's a whole other conference that hasn't played their season yet. They have to wait until the end of spring for them to finish their season in the Big Ten. So that means what I'm thinking now is that the SEC, ACC, Big 12, Pac 12, they're probably going to delay their season, postpone it until the spring as well. And that leads me to believe that if the NCAA and these conferences had all this time to prepare for a fall season, what makes you think that if the pandemic isn't solved and if there's no vaccine and we're in a similar situation nationwide in terms of dealing with this pandemic as we are right now, what makes you think that they're gonna figure something out to get these guys to play come springtime if they couldn't do it with all these months before? And leading into that, if they don't have a plan, they can't postpone playing college football from the spring into the summer because guys are graduating. Guys have lives and they need to go on with their lives after college, after football. And so that means there's going to be a ton of college football players whose professional dreams are basically shattered if there ends up not being any college football this year. Joe Burrow, the reigning Heisman winner from LSU, number one pick for the Cincinnati Bengals in this year's draft, he tweeted something very powerful, and it's that if coronavirus happened last year and NCAA and the conferences are delaying the seasons and canceling their seasons, he's not in the position he is in right now. He is not the number one pick in the draft. He is not the Heisman. He does not build that draft stock, and he does not break all those records. And before last season, Joe Burrow, people knew who he was, but people didn't really know that he could be a superstar. And best case scenario, if he doesn't play last season, he's probably a backup quarterback at best because nobody knew his potential. Well, he went out there and proved himself last season, and look, he is one of the greatest college football quarterbacks of all time, one of the best college football seasons of all time he just had. So you're going to be robbing a lot of young men of that opportunity if you keep delaying the season and eventually canceling the season, which I think might happen if we don't have a vaccine or we don't have this virus under control by springtime. So it's frustrating, but as a fan, it hurts to watch. But as a player, I can only imagine how much it's going to hurt. I mean, look at Justin Fields in Ohio State at the Big Ten. He is probably the top quarterback prospect coming into the season. And what if the Big Ten doesn't play because they already delayed their season? If there's no solution to COVID in the spring, there's not going to be a season. Where does his draft stock stand? I mean, NCAA failed the players right now. I mean, they still have time to make it up to them if they do end up playing in the fall. But it's just the domino effect where you're going to have all the other conferences kind of forcing their hand at playing in the fall. And then the risk of cancellation is just greater. So, yeah, not good news coming out of college football right now. And not just college football, it's all the other sports. I mean, what other fall sports are there where you could compete right now, qualify for Olympics in some sports that are in the Olympics, you know? So it's just unfortunate all around. And another sport that I wanted to touch on is basketball. So NBA, we're going down to the wire here. Playoffs start next week, I want to say. The Suns are undefeated in the bubble, so shout out to them. The Blazers need to win some game. This last game of the bubble coming up. The Grizzlies, they won their last game, so I think I probably should have the standings in front of me. Sorry, I'm not prepared, but you know, you just have to go out on a limb sometime, especially when you don't have your partner with you and he's on vacation. But I'm pretty sure the Grizzlies and Blazers are tied right now because the Blazers won their last game. So if I'm correct, then the Grizzlies and Blazers will have to face off if these records hold for that 8th and final playoff spot in the West. So it's going to be interesting to watch that. And then I'll probably end it right here talking about the UFC. This weekend, this Saturday, is UFC 252 with Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier 3 for the heavyweight title of the world. Huge fight. I mean, the UFC has had some classic trilogies in the past. This one's no different. You have the defending champ, Stipe Miocic, possibly the greatest heavyweight fighter in UFC history. And then you have him facing the former heavyweight champ, the guy who took Stipe's belt to begin with, the former double champ Daniel Cormier. So this fight, Cormier says that he's gonna retire after this fight, no matter what the result is. I mean, he has another baby on the way. He says he wants to be there for his family, and you can't get mad at that. You could just respect it. I mean, he wants to be a family man. He's already, in his 40s. I mean, you can only take so many poundings in the UFC. No matter how great you are, every punch takes a toll on you, especially when you get older in age. And Stipe, he said he'll fight whoever after this fight. He said he'll fight Ngannou even though he already beat him. He said he'll fight John Jones if Dana White could work that fight out. I mean, there's a lot on the line here. If Stipe wins this fight, he is hands down the greatest heavyweight fighter of all time. It solidifies it. If DC wins this fight, DC is pound for pound, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And then when he retires, he's not going to fight again. That leaves it all up for debate. Who's greater, Stipe or DC as a heavyweight? It's going to be one of those things where we might not have an answer, but maybe we will have an answer if DC wins, because he beat Stipe twice. If Stipe was really the greatest heavyweight of all time, he would have beat Cormier more times than Cormier beat him, especially Cormier, who came up from light heavyweight division. So I don't know what Maddux's thoughts on this. I don't know if Maddux even is that big of an MMA fan as I am. But my pick to win the fight is Daniel Cormier. And the reason for that is the first fight, he knocked out Stipe. And a lot of people say, oh, the eye poke that DC had on Stipe affected Stipe's eyesight and focus. And that just allowed DC to catch him with the right hand and knock him out. Well, I guess you could say that, but I think that kind of got debunked in the second fight, even though DC lost that fight and got knocked out. In the first 3 rounds of that fight, DC was like dominating Stipe. He was catching him with some right hands, a couple hooks, and pretty much he had that big takedown of Stipe in the first round. He was carrying him in the middle of the ring and then just dropped him, body slammed him. And then in the final round of that fight, Stipe decided to attack the body. And then that's what kind of hurt DC and led to the knockout. But the whole rest of that fight, DC was in control. So it really does tell me if DC could protect his body a little more, I mean, he's the better fighter here. And we saw that when Cormier fought John Jones in the second fight. Jones tested positive for PEDs, so he lost that belt again. And it's up to debate as to, even though Jones beat DC twice in light heavyweight, DC could easily say that those wins are invalid because Jones keeps testing positive every time they fought. And yeah, even in those fights between Jones and DC was just controlling the cage, pressuring John Jones, and pretty much taking the fight to Jones and was dominating him. And I think Jones just caught DC with that leg kick. It rattled him, and then Jones took over from there to knock him out. But it all depends on defense for Daniel Cormier. If he could defend himself good, not get caught, defend his body, he is the better fighter than Stipe Miocic. And even though the 2 wins for John Jones against DC are in the record books, I think that DC is a better fighter than John Jones, even though Jones is possibly the greatest MMA fighter of all time, no matter division. So that's going to be the key for DC, and I think he did learn from that second Stipe fight that he needs to defend himself. So if he doesn't defend himself, that's on him, that he didn't learn and make corrections, make adjustments coming into this trilogy fight. But it's going to be a crazy fight, and it's going to be a crazy weekend. I mean, we still got baseball going on. NHL playoffs are going on. We haven't talked about that on the podcast yet, but it's just pandemonium across all sports right now. And as a sports fan, no matter who you root for, I mean, it just gives you kind of appreciation to be able to kick back and watch sports, especially since we went, 3 months without sports. I mean, all these commissioners are giving us a feast right now. with all these events going on. So we just gotta hope that guys continue following protocol, keep themselves safe, keep those around them safe, and that these leagues could keep going on as successfully as they have been. Even though MLB has had their hiccups, they're still playing right now. There hasn't really been another outbreak other than the Marlins and Cardinals. I said the Indians have their stuff going on with them, but they're disciplining them. They're disciplining Plesac and Clevenger for not following the rules. So that's going to set a precedent. So, yeah, that's all I have for today. Next week, Maddux will be back. There will be more takes. It will be a longer show. But that's all I have for right now. I can't think of anything else I could really talk about or analyze right now. But, yep. So, see y'all later.